$100 a week. But she said they tried the healthier foods and nobody was eating them.
I appreciate the time. Stephanie Armour joining us from Bloomberg News. Thanks for joining us.
Sure, thank you very much.
We'll now take you live to the House floor for today's business.
Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., February 28, 2012. I hereby appoint the Honorable Michael G. Fitzpatrick to act as Speaker pro tempore on this day. Signed, John A. Boehner, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Pursuant to the order of the House of January 17, 2012, the Chair will now recognize members from lists submitted by the majority and minority leaders for morning hour debate. The Chair will alternate recognition between the parties, with each party limited to 1 hour, and each member, other than the majority and minority leaders and the minority whip, limited to 5 minutes each. But in no event shall debate continue beyond 11:50 a.m. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Watt, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, one of the few important accomplishments of the 111th Congress thus far has been the passage of the America Invents Act, a comprehensive reform of the United States patent system, which was signed into law by President Barack Obama on September 16, 2011. There's little disagreement that patent reform was long overdue, and even those who voted against the bill recognized how important it was to the American inventor and to American innovation to update and streamline the patent system. Our country has always respected and admired inventors. As young children, we were taught about famous inventors such as Thomas Edison, Alexander Graham Bell, Henry Ford, and many others. Frequently overlooked in the discussion of important inventors, however, has been the accomplishments of African American inventors. Until this year's publication of the children's book, What Color Is My World? The Lost History of African American Inventors by basketball legend Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, we've done little to teach children about the outstanding contributions African American inventors have made to innovation. I'd therefore like to use this time during Black History Month to pay tribute to some of the many, many contributions African American inventors have made. I'm not the first member of this body to take to the floor of the House to acknowledge the long legacy of inventiveness in the African American community. On August 10, 1894, Representative George Washington Murray, the only African American in the House of Representatives at the time, and himself the holder of 8 patents on agricultural implements, read the names of 92 African Americans who held patents and described their inventions on the House floor. Had time allowed, Representative Murray would likely have highlighted the achievements of even more patent holders. Inventors such as Thomas L. Jennings, a free person of color and one of the earliest African Americans to patent an invention, who in 1821 was awarded a patent for developing an early dry cleaning process to remove dirt and grease from clothing. Or James Fortin, another freeborn man who invented a contraption to handle the sails on a sailboat. Or Judith W. Reed, the first known woman of color to receive a patent, who created an improved dough kneader and roller. Or Henry Blair, an inventor who received utility patents on a seed and cotton planter. If Representative Murray had continued to be a member of Congress, he would no doubt have come to the floor of the House many more times to brag about African American inventors and to acknowledge the major significance of their inventions. He would have reported by the year 1900, African Americans had patented 357 inventions. And I'm certain that he would have been especially moved to share with this body that by the early to mid-20th century, African American inventors had obtained patents for innovations in countless industries, including medical, chemical, aviation, automotive, grocery, cosmetic, and apparel. For example, Garrett Morgan invented the gas mask to protect firemen and other rescuers from breathing smoke and poisonous gas when entering dangerous fires and other situations. And he was also awarded a patent for the three-way electric traffic signal. Charles Drew created a method to mass-produce blood plasma, which led to the formation of blood banks to store plasma for victims of life-threatening emergencies. Unfortunately, he bled to death following an automobile accident which occurred in my native state of North Carolina, and his injuries were too severe for the process he invented to be used to save his life. Frederick McKinley Jones was the first African-American member of the American Society of Refrigeration Engineers. He developed a means to refrigerate perishables being transported long distances. Or Jack Johnson, the best known as the great African-American boxer, received 2 patents, one for an improvement to the monkey wrench and the other for a theft prevention device for vehicles. I suspected my good friend and our colleague, Representative Darrell Issa, might be surprised to learn that Jack Johnson, an African-American inventor, developed a device to prevent people from stealing cars long before Representative Issa got into the business. I encourage my colleagues to look at the books on African-American invention, and I'll submit the rest of this statement for the record. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Burton, for 5 minutes. Without objection.
You know, Mr. Speaker, I watched the President on television the other night defending his energy policy, and he said the Republicans say drill, 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 baby, but that's not the answer. The fact is that the people of this country are suffering under severe energy prices that are rising at a rapid rate. Everything that we buy is affected by energy prices. I went to the store the other day to buy some apples and some tomatoes. The tomatoes, we got 3 tomatoes for $5, and I think we got 4 apples for $5. Now, the reason those prices are going up so rapidly is because when you transport those across the country or you use energy to produce those products, it costs more. You talk to the guys that drive these tractor-trailer units, and they'll tell you how expensive it is to transport goods and services, clothes and food and everything else that we buy. So we really need to move toward energy independence. Now, we've had the administration has had the ability to help other countries explore for oil. We sent, I think, $2 or $3 billion down to Brazil for deep water drilling, but we cut back on the permits that we could get to drill in the Gulf of Mexico because of the environmental nutcases, I call them. The President has restricted the ability of the American energy sector to drill for oil in the Gulf. We cannot drill for oil in the ANWR in Alaska. I've been up there. Talk to the gentleman who represents Alaska in the Congress, Don Young. He'll tell you there's nothing up there that's going to be damaged if we drill. And besides that, you can do it in an environmentally safe way. But we can't drill offshore because they've limited permits. He said we could. He's now saying he'll allow sub-permits, but they're very minimal. We can't drill on the continental shelf. We can't drill in the ANWR. We can't do anything to explore, really, for additional energy. And we have probably a couple hundred years' supply of natural gas that we could drill for and use the fracking procedure. But a lot of the environmentalists are trying to stop that as well. Our dependency on the Middle East is unbelievable. There's a potential for a major war over there because of Iran's nuclear development program, and we continue to depend on energy from that Persian Gulf area, from the Saudis. And they're using a lot of our money to support Wahhabism in the madrasas over there that create radical Islam. And so we need to move away from dependency on foreign oil. In Central America and South America, President Chavez in Venezuela, who doesn't like us, is working with Tehran. He's selling his oil to China, and yet we buy an awful lot of our oil from him because we're dependent on him. We need to move toward energy independence. The President will not allow the Gulf pipeline, the pipeline from Canada down to Texas, because of environmental concerns. That's been looked at for 3 years, and there's other ways around the potential problem. But he won't let it happen because of environmentalists, the radicals. Now, we can depend in the future to a degree on wind, solar, geothermal, and nuclear. But that's going to take a long time. And even if we used all of those technologies today, it would only be a drop in the bucket as far as our energy needs are concerned. You know who's demanding more and more energy all the time? China and India, by thousands and thousands of barrels of oil a day. A day. And so that oil that's coming out of other parts of the world is going to be gobbled up more and more and more by China and India. We need to move to energy independence. And the President says, oh, you know, we can't solve the problem by drilling. The fact is, we can. There's a lot of things we could do. The pipeline from Canada, drill offshore, drill in the Gulf, drill on the continental shelf, use more natural gas, do away with all the regulations that are strangling the private sector as far as energy development. So what does he want to do? He says we got to raise taxes on energy exploration on the oil companies. That's going to be passed on to the consumer in higher prices. This administration, nice guy, good smile, gives a great speech, but he's not solving our problems, and our dependency continues to increase on foreign energy. We need to move toward energy independence, and we need to do it now and not wait until after the election. I yield back the balance of my time.
The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Blumenauer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's interesting listening to the fantasy Republican talking points. The fact is we are now drilling more oil in the United States than ever before. The inconvenient facts get in the way of political talking points. But what is not a fantasy is what is happening on the political screen. The final 3 months of 2011, the campaign to re-elect President Obama and the Democratic National Committee raised $68 million. An impressive sum, all the more impressive because it was donated by 583,000 Americans who gave an average of $55 each. But earlier this month, at a retreat at the exclusive Renaissance Esmeralda Resort in Southern California, the conservative billionaire Koch brothers said they would donate a combined $60 million to super PACs to defeat President Obama. 2 billionaire brothers with opinions radically at variance with most of America are poised to cancel out the efforts of 500,000 American citizens. To understand this gross perversion of the political process, we don't have to wait to the general election and the avalanche of negative campaign ads against the president. We can look right now in the primary election for the Republican presidential nomination, where we've seen a handful of billionaires and their super PACs outspend all the Republican candidates and help turn that contest into a circus. The sad reality is that the super PACs have shaped the political campaign more than the candidates. That's the world we live in since the Supreme Court's tragic decision in Citizens United, which overturned a century of settled law and opened this floodgate of unlimited campaign spending, drowning out small donors and individuals that most of us learned in school were the cornerstone of our democracy. This Supreme Court ruling was based on the perverse idea that the court's out-of-touch majority somehow felt corporations should enjoy the same constitutional rights as people. This threatens the integrity of the political process, not just from the appearance of corruption, but actually blatantly distorting the process. As companies and sham independent organizations that are actually run by candidates' friends and employees blanket the airwaves with an avalanche of vicious negative advertising, now we somehow feel that they are protected under a First Amendment right of free speech which would be beyond the comprehension of our founding fathers. Mitt Romney may believe that corporations are people, but do the rest of us need a comedian like Stephen Colbert to remind us that only people are people? There's an outside chance that a century-old Montana law banning corporate corruption in their political landscape, which was passed after a most egregious and well-documented abuse in Montana, would actually provide the Supreme Court a lifeline to climb down from the precarious and dangerous constitutional ledge, a ledge that they have not only crawled out onto, but they have drugged the American people and the political process with them with their Citizens United decision. There's a chance that the Supreme Court will use this Montana law to reestablish the basic parameters protecting the political process from the corruption of vast sums of unregulated corporate money. But in the meantime, it's important that we advance a constitutional amendment that would eliminate the notion of corporate personalhood, explicitly stating that the rights of natural persons may only be afforded to real people, not corporations. And as we work to overturn Citizens United and ban corporate personhood, people should not have to wait to judge whether a candidate is representing the public or representing their benefactors. We should pass the Disclose Act, H.R. 4010, to require political spending by corporations and individuals to be fully transparent. We should be unstinting in other efforts in the regulatory and legal process to make sure that shareholders of corporations have an opportunity to at least know and maybe even have a say on what the corporations that they are supposed to own are doing on their behalf. We should support H.R. 1404, the Fair Elections Now Act, to promote public campaign financing to ensure the public's voice is not drowned out by moneyed special interest. The Supreme Court's decision on Citizens United was based on fantasy. The fantasy that vast sums of money from hidden special interest is not inherently corrupting. The fantasy that corporations should be accorded all the rights of individual citizens. The fantasy that super PACs run by individuals who are the closest allies, friends, and employees of candidates are somehow independent. But what is not a fantasy is what we see right now in the political landscape, the terrifying effect of super PACs and the flood of money hopelessly distorting the campaign. We should all fight to change it.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Jones, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. Today the Republicans held a conference. The Democrats do the same thing during the week, talk about issues. And I had a couple minutes to remind our Speaker of the House, John Boehner, who I like, think the world of him, that as he was talking about the domestic policies of the President and how many of them seem to be failed policies, I said, well, how about the failed policy in Afghanistan? I had written the Speaker back in November asking him to please take just a few minutes to talk to a retired Marine general who's been my advisor on Afghanistan for 3 years. He agrees with me, the general does, that we're not going to win anything there. We just let our precious resources, our children, go there and lose their legs, their life for what we don't know. And I asked the Speaker, we did in a bipartisan way. In fact, the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Duncan, who will be speaking shortly after me, we did a bipartisan letter, 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans, asking Mr. Boehner and also Ms. Pelosi to go read the National Intelligence Estimate on Afghanistan that came out in December. If they would read it, they would be better informed and better understand those of us who want to get out. And I had emailed the Commandant of the Marine Corps, who's been my advisor. He's retired now. And right before the burning of the Koran in Afghanistan, so what I'm going to share for the record, Mr. Speaker, the email happened before the burning of the Koran. And I quote the general, attempting to find a true military and political answer to the problems in Afghanistan would take decades, not years, and drain our nation of precious resources, with the most precious being our sons and daughters. Simply put, the United States cannot solve the Afghan problem, no matter how brave and determined our troops are. We need to bring our people home and prepare for the real danger that is growing in the Pacific. Mr. Speaker, I read that today in the conference. As you know, Mr. Speaker, we only have 1 minute, and a lot of members want to speak on different subjects. In addition, I did get time to read from a VSO team leader, and the VSO team leader happens to be a young Marine officer, and VSO means Village Stability Operations. And this young Marine, this team leader, emailed a friend of mine who emailed to me, if you ask me if it's worth a single American life to build governance here in Afghanistan, I would have to say no. It sometimes is very perplexing to me of just where is the outrage in this country. I've seen so many wounded from my district. Camp Lejeune is in my district, Mr. Speaker, Marines and soldiers who have lost legs, arms. I've even seen 4 young men that have no body parts below their waist. They're living and they will live, but they have nothing below their waist. I don't know where the Congress is, quite frankly. We're going to be there until 2014. Unless we get out sooner, and I've got a feeling, Mr. Speaker, we'll probably be there a little bit longer than 2015, knowing the way both parties feel about this. There's nothing we're going to change. Karzai, half the time, doesn't like us. The other half he does, and it's all about the $10 billion a month. He wants that money to buy some robes and fur caps and stick some money in foreign countries so when his administration collapses in Afghanistan, he's got some money to fall back on. Mr. Speaker, I would like to ask you in unanimous consent that I might submit for the record the letter signed by 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm just going to take another minute, then I'm going to close. In Marine Times recently, there was an article called TRICARE Costs Would Jump in Budget Plan. If we forget our veterans of yesterday and our veterans of today, I think God will punish America. These young men and women, and now the older veterans or older men and women, did so much for America to make it the greatest nation in the world because they were willing to sacrifice and give of themselves. But if we're going to continue to borrow money from China to send $10 billion a month to Karzai, $120 billion a year, that to me, Mr. Speaker, is a sin, quite frankly. We need to wake up in this country and figure out if we're going to fix our problems, we start right here in America and fix our problems before we worry about the world's problems. And 72 of our service people have been killed by the trainees in Afghan that they were trying to train to be policemen or soldiers. 72 have been shot and killed by the people they were training. Where in the world does that make any sense? Mr. Speaker, it doesn't make any sense. It's time for America to wake up and demand that Congress get our troops out now, not in 2014. And, Mr. Speaker, before I close, as I always do, I ask God to please bless our men and women in uniform. I ask God to please bless the families of our men and women in uniform. I ask God in His loving arms to hold the families who've given a child dying for freedom in Afghanistan and Iraq. I ask God to bless the House and Senate that we will do what is right in the eyes of God for His people here in the United States of America. I ask God to please bless the President of the United States that he will do what is right in the eyes of God for God's people here in the United States. And I'll close 3 times. God, please, God, please, God, please continue to bless America. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Wisconsin, Ms. Moore, for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to be recognized for 5 minutes and to be able to add material, extraneous material.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, lately, I, along with many other women, have felt like we are mere supporting cast in an episode of The Twilight Zone. I can just hear the narration of the show saying, "You're traveling through another dimension, a dimension not only of sight and sound, but of mind. That's a signpost up ahead. Your next stop, the Twilight Zone." The rhetoric espoused over the last few weeks by many conservatives has me feeling as if I'm in an alternative political universe where men say the most oddly absurd things about what women should be doing with their bodies. In this universe, the House Committee on Government Oversight and Reform holds hearings on women's health and contraception with a panel made up completely of men. Now, this may seem odd to you folks out there in the real world, but in this alternate reality, it makes perfectly good sense that a bunch of middle-aged men devoid of ovaries and uteruses would be experts on women's reproductive health. In this alternate universe, you wouldn't dare ask a woman to testify on women's health and what it means to be a woman. You wouldn't invite them to talk about what it means to be susceptible to pregnancy for approximately 30 years of their lives and how important birth control is to women who wish to prevent unintended pregnancies and to preserve their health. And you surely wouldn't ask a woman to testify about how birth control has helped them prevent various diseases or manage diseases like endometriosis. Now, while it would be nice to believe we're in the twilight zone, the recent ploys of Republicans against women's health are all frighteningly too real. In reality, this hearing did take place with the House Government Oversight and Reform Committee blocking the testimony of women like Georgetown University law student Sandra Fluke, who later testified during a special hearing convened by Democratic Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi, of a fellow female student at Georgetown University who had been denied contraceptive coverage because of the university's Catholic affiliation. Her friend experienced complications stemming from ovarian cysts that could have been treated with birth controls. But sadly, due to non-treatment, doctors eventually were forced to remove her ovary. There are just so many stories just like this that need to be told. But sadly, you won't hear them on Capitol Hill if my Republican colleagues in the majority have anything to do with it. They are too busy silencing women's voices on these very critical issues. What if there was a hearing held on access to Viagra or vasectomies with a panel of experts being a group of 6 women? Could you imagine the outrage if women were allowed to legislate what happens to men's bodies? The horror. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Speaker, this twilight zone is real. This attack on women's health is real, but the battle is not over. We cannot and will not allow a few to silence the voices of millions of women across this country. We must continue to stand up for women and their reproductive health. I yield back the balance of my time.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Duncan, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I request permission to address the House and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I voted to go to war in Afghanistan, but I did not vote for a forever permanent war that has now lasted almost 3 times as long as World War II. We should have ended our involvement in Afghanistan many years ago, and many young American lives would have been saved. The first war against Iraq and Kuwait lasted just 7 months. Now, with the recent killings of 4 more Americans and with massive anti-American demonstrations being conducted by hundreds of thousands of Afghani citizens, we need to greatly speed up our withdrawal. We need to leave Afghanistan the sooner the better. We've spent hundreds of billions there over the last decade, a great amount of which has really been just pure foreign aid. We have built schools and medical facilities and helped their farmers. We have trained their police and military and have had thousands of Afghanis on our payroll. We've had to borrow approximately 41% of all of these mega billions we have spent to help the Afghan people. No country has done nearly as much, Mr. Speaker, for another country in the entire history of the world as we have done for Afghanistan. Now the people there have made it very clear that they do not appreciate what we have done for them. In fact, not only are they ungrateful, but they are showing through their actions that they have anger or even hatred toward us. We should stop spending all these billions of taxpayer just as soon as we possibly can. I did not criticize President Obama when he apologized for the burning of the Korans. However, I did not think it was something that rose to the level that required a presidential apology. Some person or persons made a mistake in burning the Korans. They should have apologized, or the commander of the Air Force Base, or perhaps our ambassador. However, now, where is the apology from the Afghan leadership about the Americans who have been killed, or for all the hatred and anger directed toward our country? Where is the gratitude for all that America and Americans have done for the Afghan people over the last 10 or 11 years? We have a national debt of over $15 trillion that is headed far higher at a more rapid rate than ever before. It is far past the time that we should have been taking care of our own country and putting our own citizens first. We need to let the Afghan people run Afghanistan, and we need to stop trying to be everything to everybody all over the world. We simply cannot afford it, and we are jeopardizing the future of ourselves, our children, and our grandchildren if we continue trying to run the whole world. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess until noon today.
And members are taking a break now between morning hour speeches and the start of legislative work at noon Eastern.